Now, later this week, the world's leaders will gather in New Delhi, India, for the G20 summit. It's the first time India is hosting the event, and to get a sense of the big issues at this year's gathering, I'm very pleased to be joined by Tristen Naylor. He's a lecturer in international politics at the University of Cambridge, and he joins us now from New Delhi. Hello to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
So the G20 last year, unsurprisingly, was dominated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Do you think it will do so again this weekend?
It will be very much a repeat of what we saw last year at the summit in Bali. Once again, the war in Ukraine isn't formally on the summit agenda, and yet it will absolutely dominate discussions here this weekend in New Delhi, without question.
And Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, isn't attending. No big surprise there. But Xi Jinping of China isn't going either, even though it was thought actually he might go. Why do you think he's staying away?
Well, simply put, the Chinese position on the war in Ukraine is certainly out of step with most of the G20 members as well. Both Russia and China have disassociated themselves with any language in working group paragraphs in the preparatory meetings for the summit. And so there's very little room for agreement on really the big issues that matter. And I think that Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has decided that it's just not worth coming. It's not worth coming to be lectured to by others. It feels that that wouldn't be a good thing for him, and it's not something he's interested in. And I suspect this also means that he doesn't think that it's very likely that the leaders will reach a consensus agreement at the end of the weekend.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because even though Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin aren't going this year, clearly there are real divisions. And as you say, there is talk ahead of the summit that this could be the first time a G20 comes to an end without the world leaders agreeing on some kind of communique. Do you think then that is likely? And if it happens, what does that tell us about the state of diplomacy today?
Well, it's certainly more likely of an outcome than we have ever seen before. So that doesn't bode well. It's not impossible. It is always within the realm of possibility that the senior diplomats and the leaders here can clutch victory from the jaws of defeat on the final night of the summit. But it is indeed less likely than ever before. The Indian presidency had hoped, as a sort of fallback measure, to use the communique that it was agreed in Bali last year as sort of the baseline. That if we can't agree to anything new, can we at least agree to what we agreed to last year? And what we're learning now is that both the Russian delegation and the Chinese delegation have said that that's no longer acceptable. They can no longer sign up to that, in their words, because of increased intervention by the West in the war in Ukraine. So there's no real fallback position here. It is going to be it's going to be a very interesting weekend ahead. And in terms of your second question, what does this mean for the world that we find ourselves in now? I think we're very likely, at least in the near to midterm, to see big international summits ending with no consensus agreement for the time being. Simply put, the major powers in the world find themselves at odds with one another over the big issues that really matter. And that's just not a recipe for consensus and cooperation.
And I'm interested in your thoughts on India's role as the first time it's ever hosted a G20. And what kind of image do you think Narendra Modi wants to project onto the world stage this weekend?
The Indian Prime Minister wants to project this image of India having finally taken its place, not just at the top table of global governance, global economic governance in particular, but indeed being able to lead that table. This is a major moment in performing and declaring India's status as one of the major powers in the world. Whether or not Narendra Modi can achieve a consensus communique at the conclusion of the summit will have a big effect on how then the rest of the world sees that status and whether or not they recognize India as rightfully having a place not just at the table, but as a leader at the table.
And just a final thought from you. It's been reported, although it hasn't been confirmed for the moment, that the African Union will be granted permanent membership at the G20 this year. That would give it the same status as the European Union. How significant would that be?
I think it would be very significant. The African Union has been invited as a guest for years and years and years. This would sort of elevate their status within the club. It's certainly something that is long overdue. The African continent remains badly underrepresented in this club. And I do think it's quite likely. I've not heard anything here yet about there being division on this issue. And if anything, the leaders and certainly the host at the conclusion of the summit always need something to announce, some sort of big success to cite as the hallmark of the summit. And I reckon that even if there is no communique, we're very likely to hear Prime Minister Modi at the end of the summit say, there's no communique, but look, we have a new substantive inclusion of the global south, of the African continent, of the African Union in the G20. And that is a major diplomatic victory.
Tristen Naylor talking to us there just ahead of the G20 in New Delhi. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.